Cameron, how are you,
Tom,
mate?
good morning. How are you?
I am better now that I'm a couple of days past my conference hangover, but yeah, I'm good.
Oh,
I'm really
well,
good.
you should have a lot to talk about. I'm excited to hear about it.
Yeah, welcome to the build
Welcome to
week.
the build, where we're going to
All
deep dive all the announcements from Apple this week. I think, right? That'll just take up the whole episode.
the Apple and their underwhelming announcements. Yeah, I've got some things to get off my chest. Yeah, let's get into it. So I've been to a couple of conferences. Well, been to one conference and seen a couple of things. Yeah, it's been a pretty good week, right? AI related week or tech related week.
Yeah, in
What's
some
caught your eye?
sense, I'm joking here about, and I don't know if I dare say it's been a quiet week, because there have been a lot of big announcements, and I'm really excited about the MCP stuff. And there's been really, really great progress in MCP, but outside of that, I didn't have a ton, honestly. It was like the first time in a while, I feel like, where I'm like, eh, there,
Uh,
eh.
I don't know. I think if we touch on the Apple announcements, I think one of the best things is probably they're at least attempting to make AI enabled development in Xcode better. I don't know if you use Xcode very much, but I'm not a app developer, but where I currently work, I work with the iOS team a lot, and it's a great system, but it basically didn't feel as good as Xcode as Cursor. And then if you wanted to use OpenAI, you had to use the app connector, like to the ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to, but that was a common way. And it just wasn't as good. Like if I wanted to expose the logs or the console, like it's just a pretty disconnected kind of environment, particularly for I was trying to use it with Claude, and then you have to install the additional CLI tool for Xcode so that Claude can see it. But hopefully that's sort of just like they close the loop on that, which would be great. I was more interested in some of the stuff that they were potentially going to talk about in the augmented reality environment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I definitely bought one of these when it came out, and these bad boys.
I applaud you for that, because I was really excited when that came out. And also, I didn't end up buying one, but the number of people who just thought that was the stupidest idea, and I still back that. I still think it's an awesome idea. It's version 1, and
Yes, the reason why I got it is the so I founded an app company, and then that was rolled into a larger company, which is where I now work, and that was an augmented reality app, effectively, but for a business use case. We never called it an augmented reality app because as soon as you do that, people think it's like games and Snapchat and stuff. But so I'm quite interested in that world, and so that's why we got it. We build almost entirely on iOS, and they invest a lot in that augmented reality stack for developers, so you can build some pretty good stuff. And it's all standardized hardware, which is the next piece. When they bought that out, like they spent billions and billions of dollars on that project, and they're still going, right? And it's exceptional in terms of the eye tracking and some of it's both the engineering achievement of the device, the headset, but also they put the Apple user experience design kind of nuance into it and really nailed some of the interaction patterns, as well as building out the ecosystem for app developers to build interactive kind of augmented reality or augmented virtual apps. They're not the only ones, obviously, but when Apple does something, they do it for real. And Tim Cook said that they're bringing out their glasses now, so it's going to be heating up. Like, so what exactly. I was about to say,
and you kind of already know that it's going to some glasses form factor or something else, but I just thought it was an amazing achievement, and the amount of technology and the number of sensors and chips in that one little device is pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah. So I this week I was at an augmented reality conference called AWE in Long Beach, and there's a lot of it was a great conference because there's a lot of hardware like suppliers from China who were just like demoing, and they're like, all right, we sell lenses or we sell eye tracking chips, or Qualcomm had a big presence there, and they basically Snapdragon chips run pretty much every single one of these devices. And all of the form factor is going down. It's basically going to be a barbell. There's like the Meta App Vision Pro, all of those kind of headsets, which are larger form factor. at one end, and that will stay. And that's like, you've got a supercomputer on your face. And then there's this form factor, which is like the Meta Ray-Ban style things. And that there's going to be nothing in between. So Snap, the social media network, they had their glasses and we demoed them and they're good, but you're just never going to wear them because the form factor is wrong. It's like a pair of glasses that's too huge.
Right.
Like it looks dumb. Like you're just not going to do it, right?
Right.
If you want to do gaming, you put on a gaming headset, right? Whereas the glasses form factor, like Google XR, those guys were there talking about they're basically Android platform for wearables. They're entering the game. Meta's going into it really hard. Apple's going into it really hard. And now, because we can have these on-device models, the interaction pattern with voice is just excellent, right? And so I think it's a breakout time for wearable AR. But that's been said. Basically, anyone who's worked in augmented reality has weathered this. It's like they're like straight out of Game of Thrones. It's like winter is coming. Like the winter has always been there. And there's so many false starts, there's so many disappointments and stuff. It's just like you talk to them and you're like, man, you've got so much staying power. Like I'm so impressed with you working in augmented reality for 15 years.
Yeah, it's funny. It's almost to say like it takes a courageous person to to make that your to stand on that,
There's so many cool use cases now, like particularly with agents. So there were a couple of companies there talking specifically about this, but like building agents for training in augmented reality is really cool for business use cases. So there's heaps of gaming stuff, but I'm not really into gaming. I'm not like a consumer guy. But a lot of companies are taking some of the gaming tech and then building out agents in the way that we would talk about building out an agent, and then embedding that in an augmented reality environment to do training. For example, you could basically do sales objection handling, or you could do sales training, but rather than just going, all right, Jenny, how would you deal with this fictional scenario? You basically just put on a pair of glasses or a headset and chuck them in with a customer that's really angry and they have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And then they could be quick. Like that's just one example. I know a Ukrainian entrepreneur. She's got like a very successful business just doing sales enablement using augmented reality for selling very specific drug types and very specific medical devices that require like a visualization experience. Yeah, there's heaps of those kind of applications that now if you can build an agent that talks to you and feels like a human, you could actually build really useful business apps that are augmented reality apps. So yeah, some really cool stuff. The other factor is like the form factor. I was saying the form factor is going down, whereas these devices, so these are the Meta devices, all it is cameras and then some speakers at the back, and it connects to your phone. And that's it. It doesn't have any of the, projection stuff. But then one of the guys that I was, talking to, a supplier, their whole company from China just does eye tracking chips. So they sell the sensors that do eye tracking. Mm-hmm. And then his demo was like, all right, well, a pair of glasses like this. And then he showed me and I put them on and then it was super accurate. It could really track down to the really, fine grained detail where I was looking in the conference hall, which is cool. That's been around for a while, but the form factor was the amazing thing. The chips were like this big. They were tiny. Like they fit basically right in there on the inside of the glasses, which basically means you can have like a form factor of this, but it will be tracking where my eyes are looking, and I can say, and then you've got your voice interaction over the top with an on-device model. It's pretty amazing.
Bringing it all together. What company did you say that was? I think I watched a video the other day on.
Oh, those guys were, I don't know. The guy could hardly speak English. He was Chinese guy. So and it's like a Chinese named company, so I can't remember the name of it. But the like X-Real is like they've got a form factor of glasses that are kind of like that. I know, and Meta is building their next version, which will have some of these interaction patterns. And it's interesting seeing people trying to get around the whole, like, well, how do I make it kind of detect what my hands are doing without it looking crazy or being too large? So like some of them have smart rings and the rings connect to the glasses and then you can interact with your hands. Yeah. It's interesting how they're doing it.
Yeah. I remember just something that didn't occur to me was the complexity of like how many bones and muscles are in our hands, right? So like sensors, to create sensors and have that accuracy, it's really way more difficult. I read into it from a while back, but
I was talking to one of the developers. Yeah, it is. One of the developers at Snap, he was telling me about how they do it on their glasses, and they have infrared sensors right at the bottom of the glasses that basically do anything sort of from here down, so that picks up your hand movements.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really good. Like their detail on that form factor was really good. Like probably as good as their Vision Pro, but the form factor was sort of half the size. Still not good enough for you to wear it around. Like you would not wear that around, at least in Western countries. I think there's a different culture in some Asian cultures around some of this stuff. But I was playing like virtual darts and there's all sorts of stuff. But again, it's just games. Like I'm more interested in what's the enterprise application. And I think with some of these agentic like expanded use cases that where you can build and instantiate an actual person that you can talk to, opens up quite a few interesting business use cases for some of these devices now. And then there's always like the crazy, like amazing things in there. Like one guy I was speaking to does and has been doing it for years, really high end headset like integrations into defense. So one of the things that he's built is a dogfighting simulator for Air Force pilots. And they've been doing it for a while. Like, and it's really, really, really expensive hardware integration with everything's custom into the stack. But basically, a pilot will go up in an actual fighter plane and then run through a simulated dogfight in an actual flight, so that when they turn their head, in their actual headset is the actual plane that they're supposed to be fighting. Like so there's that sort of stuff, which is pretty cool.
Which stuff like that, I mean, that's insanely consequential as far as like the amount of money, in comparison to flying jets. For that, I mean,
yeah. Well, and like a simulator, a flight simulator, you go into a room, right? Whereas this is like, well, it's simulated, but you're in your actual, like you're actually flying at the time. But the problem was, he said like they spend maybe 8 hours in it, but it's like projected out by 8 feet. So they've got all these weird kind of like, they get woozy because your eyeballs are focusing on the wrong spot. Like, so the thing you're focusing on is to your perception 2 miles away, but actually it's 8 feet in front of your face. And there's all sorts of weird like problems that can create.
Yeah, no kidding. I can't even imagine, but it's super impressive.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. And just figuring out what's coming down the pipe in that space for me in particular. It's pretty nice. Did you have anything else that you caught your eye this week?
Really just the MCP stuff, like I said. And I know I come to the table every time with something related to MCP, but that is what has me really excited. And we're going to do some demos. I'll walk through some things related to MCP. There's actually like 3 different separate projects, but I want to hear more about, was that everything from the conference, Tom?
Was everything from the conference. I've got, unless you got questions about it, I've got one thing to show you from a follow-up from our creative tooling kind of project, which is pretty sick if you want to see that before we move on.
I do. I'd love to.
Yeah. So in that session, we were talking about, or I was talking about how my next or desired state is if you could project out into a 4-dimensional kind of experience for content creators. And I saw this project kind of emerge, which these guys built. They've built basically it's a demo environment where you can, they still have multiple cameras set up and they film the environment, and then you can render it down into a 4-dimensional kind of 3D rendered space, and then recut and re-edit and update. So you can zoom in and zoom out. Like this is a 3JS or a web VR viewer, like what we were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like I was saying in that, like the next phase is to get to this sort of point where we can manipulate camera angles and go into like a virtualized studio space.
That's amazing. And really, I was thinking about was it Google had the video conferencing solution that they just was it at IO, and it's really, I'm wondering, you're more of an expert on this. Well, I'm not an expert on this at all. So is that the same technology as far as the capture goes, or was this captured from just a regular photo?
These guys captured it from regular cameras at multiple angles and rendered it down. I believe that's how they've done it.
Okay.
I'll share the project in the notes. It's not quite at the point where I want it to be, like I was showing with those Nerf studio things where you have photos. It renders down all of the 3-dimensional environment, and then you can reset the camera angle from multiple places. But the difference with this is it's just rendering, like you just film something and then you've got all of the potential opportunities to recut and reshoot that same piece of content from different angles, which is interesting and quite new. The next step from that is like, all right, we render it down into this 3D space. I get my agent to recreate it using React or something it's familiar with, and I can recreate the scene and say, all right, rather than you sitting there, talking to the camera like this guy is, I want him to get up, walk outside, get on a horse and ride off, right? That's the next step. But yeah, I thought it was interesting to highlight because, this is a newish research project that's come out specifically in that domain. I think the Google one is like, it's like rendering it in sort of 3D off the screen. So the screen feels like it's a bit more real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to say they had like 16 cameras or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but
yeah, that's all I had.
Do you have
for us?
So that obviously, if you're somebody who's a creative and you typically produce those types of videos, of course that's impactful to you. But in your discussions and the work you do in your space, is that impactful to other areas that I just wouldn't think of, or like unexpected? A lot of times people think, oh, this is going to immediately impact this group of people, and it's actually something we didn't expect. I mean, anything.
Well, these things always play out. New technology always plays out in unexpected ways, right? So the obvious part is the most obvious case, but it's always the first step. So everyone in advertising has adopted these tools like to a significant degree already. Advertising and marketing. There was a Google report out about adoption patterns, and that was, the highest adoption pattern in any kind of cohort, really. And it makes perfect sense. So, you shoot an ad, might be $100,000 to do the creative production for a specific, standard ad that you might be putting, say, $1 million to $2 million worth of media spend behind. In that context, with these tools, that production hasn't gone down to dollars, but it's definitely gone down to like thousands of dollars, right? In terms of where these things go, I think the most exciting area and the area that everyone's working on the most is the robotics application, which is what NVIDIA is really going hard at. And they basically create these virtualized worlds, which are a digital twin or a kind of recreation of an environment, to be maybe a manufacturing environment or whatever. And then they train virtualized robot experiences in that space or on that space to try and simulate how a robot will actually perform its tasks in there without directly programming the robotic, like the actual robot. It's all right, go into this virtualized space. They call it a digital cousin. Go into this virtualized space and make all of the mistakes you're going to make and make them millions of times so that you don't make those mistakes when we actually put you in there for real. That's the most exciting and interesting part of this, like, recreating the world in a virtual space.
Well, I think they use that for designing manufacturing facilities and things like that as well, right?
Yeah,
like simulating the I don't know the logistics, the efficiencies, the risk. I mean,
yeah, there's a really good talk about this from two guys. One of the guys is the DeepMind, one of the DeepMind researchers who did this paper called The Age of Experience, where the whole idea is that the next gen of AI models will learn based on their own patterns of data generation. And then the NVIDIA guys did a talk about this, how they built this sort of path to the real world where they have these virtualized environments and then training within those virtualized environments back on a task set for the actual, robots or, AI models or agentic AI models that may be embodied in a robot and may just be observing or, monitoring a production site or whatever it is for errors. Those two sort of domains of research are going to change the world 100%. And I think, neural radiance fields, these sorts of things just play one part in that sort of bigger space. I think it's Fei Li who has the world's research kind of group. I think it's out of Stanford. She's like one of the godmothers of AI, and she did all of the first image recognition kind of models way back in the day. And she's big in this space. They're doing a lot of research in this area, if you're interested.
I am. Yeah. And this is why I love talking to you, Tom, because there's so many things that are kind of outside of my lens, but super interesting. I've learned a lot on things like that. It's funny,
I appreciate that, mate. And
you know,
also, it's because it's sexy, right?
yeah, you were talking about the agents learning, and last week we talked about agent memory, and that's kind of a thing coming up. But if you think about it, that is really your IP. If you're capturing all of these processes and all of these things, that's like your entire intelligence of your business captured in bits, right?
Yeah. It is interesting how a lot of companies who are AI specific software companies basically say that their secret sauce is their data, specifically their evaluation sets, and optimizing their evaluation sets. Like, for example, Harvey, in their LangChain talk, they basically talked about how they created a very specific, very high quality legal benchmark evaluation set that's proprietary to them that enables them to build the best legal copilot. So you're right. Actually, interesting on that. So the guys that I met at this conference who are building these, agentic kind of VR, I guess you call them avatar companies. Of the guys that I spoke to, they use Mem0 for the configurability. Yeah. But yeah, those are all my updates.
I'm wondering, can I backtrack a little bit?
Yeah.
You're talking about in the advertising space and all these things you're talking about, how much faster, I guess maybe you didn't specifically say that, but I think that's pretty much implied, right? It used to cost a ton of money to produce this content. If you're an advertising agency, now you go to your clients and they say, well, it's basically, it takes you no time at all now. So how do you see that impacting margin and the revenue that you can make out of that? Because that's something I think about and I talk about a lot, is setting expectations. We on the tech side, we're just constantly talking like, oh, you can. It used to take you multiple weeks. You can do it in an hour. Well, it's true, but not all the time. You're not always going to be that efficient on everything, right? So setting expectations is, I think, a little bit difficult now. I don't know how many people really struggle with that, but I can see in the advertising space especially, they're like, well, you just generated this content with AI. You didn't really do anything, right? And that's not true. It still takes a lot of expertise, and so I'm curious if you see that or hear stories about that.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting area. It's a good question. So advertising, I think if you haven't worked in it, like in marketing and advertising and those areas, it's a surprise, I think, to most people who haven't worked in there, how many creative ideas are actually created through the process of getting to something. Like, there are well-established kind of creative processes that you'll go through when you're building out a creative program that's designed to achieve a business outcome, right? And it is easy to assess whether it's worked or not. It's because did you sell more? Did you not? Right? Did you change people's behavior? Did you not change their behavior? It's easy to say. Sometimes it's hard to measure, but it is easy, like, to define if it is a success. I think with these tools, it's easy to assume that it will just be the same amount of work happening faster, or the same amount of work happening, at a lower cost. The primary thing about, say, great creative is that there are a lot of really creative people, professionals, who never get to produce, a lot of material. Say in the advertising world, there aren't that many creatives that are the key creatives in ad agencies, right? In the past, there just weren't that many companies that could afford to pay the money to engage those people. But there are a lot of those people. I think with these tools, every single business will get access to great creative minds who can then execute really impressive creative work. So we're actually just going to see an explosion of more, I think. Despite the fact that it might happen faster, it actually might not be faster, because the main rate, like the rate limiter, might actually just be the pace at which these people can come up with good creative ideas. Because because we're all of our feeds are flooded with all of this kind of AI generated stuff, but not a lot of it is truly creative work.
Right. I think we talked about it a little bit. There's a big difference between stock, like stock content type of stuff versus what's a
Yeah.
really impactful creative. And
Yeah.
that still takes.
And there's really impactful creative, which is entertaining, but then there's really impactful creative that affects a business outcome. And that is different. And that's a very specific skill set as well. It's not like that's a narrow band or it's not widely available. It is a very specific skill. It's different to just creating like a film.
Well, yeah, I
But
mean,
I just
there's
think with these tools that the amount of businesses that will get access to high quality creative ideas to take their products to market will explode by 1,000x, like or more.
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe in the space, there's a lot of science about like tapping into emotions and things like that, right? So you can create things that visually look amazing, but I think it has to still takes that person to be able to tap into the emotion, understand why this context could hit certain people a certain way. I mean,
yeah, I think the people who will crack this are Google or Facebook, or Google or Meta, basically, because the most rapid way to get to that understanding is through rapid iteration. And if you've got the ability to execute like a lot of really high quality creative at scale across a range of different customers, then you kind of win. Which has been true in those platforms for a long time. Like anyone who's spent any money in those platforms knows, they're great to experiment with. I'm looking forward to, actually, that's one of the things that came out this week, looking forward to when Meta really hits their stride on the AI front. So Llama 4 was pretty disappointing, right? Apparently Zuckerberg's just basically taken over the whole team. I was reading some reporting like he's like personally recruiting like really high quality talent. They're expecting to spend $60 to $65 billion, I believe, this year. And then they just loaded up $14 billion of that on Scale AI, which is like a training data platform. Like that founder, he's like, is only 28. Like it's unbelievable. But like when they really hit their stride, I think in this creative domain, we're going to see some pretty incredible stuff, in addition to the fact that they need all of these tools to run their next gen platform, which they're betting on, which is the headsets and the glasses. So yeah, once Llama 5 comes out, I think it'll be great.
He's bet a lot on that. So I can see where it's like, hey, we need to make some progress. We got to make this happen. I guess we'll pause here. I want to go into, so you had a Claude Code run through listed here.
Yeah, I was wondering if we wanted to do that because we spoke about it last time, but we didn't really do anything. It was more just showing how you and I use Claude Code, but I haven't prepped that. I reckon we could probably save that for another time.
Yeah. And again, I started using Codex a lot more, and primarily just for like check for bugs and then fix some issues like minor bug checks and stuff like that. But I can see my use of that picking up substantially, especially if they were to, I mentioned Linear and how Devin integrates directly with Linear. So once you can schedule jobs and things like that with Codex, and I don't think that's possible. If that's possible, then I missed it. But if you can run all these jobs in parallel at the same time and then just be notified,
I think you can. Yeah, I think you can Codex? Because you can integrate it with I think both Codex and Claude Code have their GitHub integrations, and they integrate with GitHub Actions, and you can interface directly with the issues. So you can say, all right, pick up this issue like this, and then create a plan for it, create a branch, and then create the pull request, and then you can have it automatically, like if it passes tests or some validation through GitHub Actions.
Like when when you commit it.
So if you're managing through, say, GitHub and GitHub projects, then apparently you can.
Yeah, that's true. I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking more about the direct integrations. I guess exactly what I'm talking about with Devin. And sorry, we didn't necessarily plan to show that, and I'm just talking about it. But with Devin, you have direct integration. You can have it run in the background, and then it's basically like Slack. I mean, in fact, you can connect it to Slack too, but it sends you notifications. You essentially chat, and you can have a bunch of those instances running in the background. So that's more of like, how can I do that with Codex? And I haven't spent a ton of time on it, so maybe it's possible.
Yeah, I need to spend more time with it as well. I do that with that's how I set up the Devon thing. I just integrated it into a Slack channel, and that's really cool. Like I can see how that would be an incredible interface. I can see why they did that, because then you could have it automatically responding to other channels. So like if you have a channel and then you route messages direct into your Devon and say, hey, we've detected this issue on, an automatic kind of test suite that might be running across your website, for example. There's like, something coming out of your Google console alerts. This is a 404. All right, Devon, go and check that out. Something simple that you would give to a junior dev, just direct happening on autopilot through that Slack interface.
Exactly. But people like to compare AI to people for some reason, but like, yeah, you have it's just like Slack. That's your team, and you're interfacing with your team members, agents, through that interface, and you're notified when they need approval or questions, and you're just approving. You're an agent manager at that point. So
apparently, yeah, like some pretty significant job dissatisfaction rates are happening for these for developers who are now being tasked to just be agent managers, because and you probably know this way better than me, but it's like your job becomes code review rather than writing code, and most devs hate that idea a lot. But I think it's unhelpful actually to go back to what you're saying around like giving these agents names. I know it seems like a small thing, but I actually think it matters a lot, because it makes us, I think the expectation bar goes really, really high. Like calling it Mary, your new marketing manager, or Devon, your new junior developer. It also sets up a really weird kind of interaction, like where people are actually trying to, like, I think they perceive and sort of interact with some of these things as if they were like anthropomorphically kind of rendered people.
I know it's a weird line. I feel like it really started with Alexa. I think that's the first that I can think of where people started saying her or.
Sorry, you just turned Alexa on behind me. It's not helpful. Yeah. All right. Do you want to transition into a demo?
Yeah, let's do it. On the MCP, is that what you're thinking?
I reckon, yeah. I'd love to see a bit more MCP and get you to explain a bit more to me my Simple Simon approach.
Yeah, well,
let's go through some of those changes and then also get into the Open Agent platform as well, and then wrap it up. We're going to talk through like
absolutely.
How to identify agent opportunities.
They all kind of tie together, and I think that's what, when I talk about Open Agent platform, it doesn't necessarily stand out. I think it flew under the radar, to be honest, at least from my perspective, and maybe I'm just a LangChain nerd. I don't know, but it has a lot of impact in the MCP space as well. So I'll hit on that. But first, I guess just a little bit more background for those who didn't hear about it. It was, I believe, like Wednesday last week, ChatGPT made the announcement that OpenAI made the announcement that they're integrating what they're calling connectors in ChatGPT. So in classic form, it's a really mixed environment as far as they enabled this capability on Windows desktop, but not Mac. And can you guess why? Because this entire announcement is geared at the enterprise. And they've put their foot forward and said, like, now ChatGPT is your business platform. We're ready to go.
Well, and also the fact that Microsoft owns 49% of them.
Right. And what's really interesting is some of the first connectors that they made available are Microsoft, which, again, if you're targeting the enterprise, it makes sense. But it's certainly more accessible than what Microsoft has put out so far. They said we're MCP native and all these things. Unless I'm missing something, they don't have anything close to what ChatGPT just put out, or OpenAI. Let me let me share my screen. Now, Tom, have you experimented at all with the connectors? And it's also takes special licenses, and different licensing tiers have different features.
I haven't, mate. So
Okay,
I'm
so
all ears.
this is the
Give me a rundown.
update. Well, I guess so. This is the web platform or web app. I'll pull up the desktop app, and you can see it's the same, essentially the same thing here. So it looks a little bit different, right? You've always had your tool selections and different configurations down here at the bottom. Well, now you have this tools button, and you'll notice this search connectors button. So the way that OpenAI has rolled this out is really interesting. At the moment, any of the connectors that they have are read only. So you can perform search and deep research. And they're different configurations or different capabilities. So when you build your MCP server, you design it to be compatible with deep research or just regular research or chat. So it's really powerful, and I am really impressed. But that is what I see as a limitation in comparison to some of the other platforms like Anthropic. And at the same time, I totally understand why they would make it search only when they're targeting the enterprise. They want to make sure they're building that trust, and people aren't just deploying things out there in the wild. They're going to mess up, present risk essentially. So
in that search connector, if you open them up in the sources, there's three. There's chat, search, and deep research. Is that correct?
Correct. And well, there's also a sync, and we'll talk about that too.
Okay, cool. And then they've got, is it data controls and then this sign-in component where they're trying to also like have an auth layer? Do they bring in the Microsoft auth layer as well?
Exactly. And that's the big deal.
That is a big deal. So Microsoft gives such an ownership of identity that they have, right?
Right, exactly. But what they're doing is you can deploy these MCP servers, and I guess I didn't say that specifically. Connectors are MCP servers.
Yeah.
So each one of these is a MCP server that OpenAI has built. I think with the exception of like HubSpot, they built their own. And so what we'll start to see, we will start to see essentially app marketplaces or integration marketplaces develop.
Yeah.
So you'll notice that there's a create button. You can add your own. So there's a open DeepWiki, which is really cool. We have started using DeepWiki quite a bit. They have a server that does not require authentication. So
for reference, DeepWiki is out of the Devon Cognition Labs team, and they basically have this AI generated documentation layer over 30,000 plus GitHub repos so that LLMs can traverse more effectively across like what the repository is about, is what DeepWiki is.
Okay, so the other thing I'll note, and I started off saying it's still a little bit of a jumbled environment at the moment. And the reason I say that, if you're familiar with, if you do anything with MCP and you know about the difference between the SSE or server send events architecture versus streamable HTTP that just came out in March, there are actually 3 different ways that you can design your MCP servers, and then every client has different compatibility. So like this instance, I know that DeepWiki has a streamable HTTP version that's available at the MCP endpoint. And now while I'm talking, I can't remember if it's I need to set this to SSE specifically. Sorry, I had it. Might already have this added.
I think this is like a classic MCP demo. I've been to so many things like live events where MCP, they're like, oh yeah, I've got it all set up, and then they get in there and like, it worked 5 minutes ago.
Well, no, this is a this is a different problem. This is me. This is not an MCP problem. And I think when people have that sentiment. Now I'm like MCP fanboy here, so I'm like defending defending the ecosystem. But it's when you're deploying these
essential, right?
when you're deploying the servers locally on your computer or in Docker, you run into a lot of connection issues, right? Where it'll just all of a sudden it's disconnected, it starts throwing errors. So these hosted MCP servers, in my opinion, that's the future. That's where people are moving things. Specifically with the streamable HTTP protocol that they've built in, that alleviates a lot of that connectivity issue that we see quite often.
Yeah, so tell me more about that. So what's the difference?
The streamable HTTP relies on WebSockets, and you do a lot with voice, right? Or I've started in the voice space. So,
yeah, so like, and this is the basis of the real-time API that OpenAI has, right?
I'm sorry, and this is where I've gotten
Sorry.
I keep mixing it up with Anthropic's integrations, because I'll show that too. It's basically the same thing, but the compatibility is it's still different. You have to set up the servers a different way. So apologies. I told you, Tom, I was going to do everything on my Windows computer. I'm trying here. I guess I do it to myself. I work on a Mac and Windows computer, and it doesn't always make life easy.
Every time I make that switch, I regret it. I've done it a few times through the years. I switch off Mac and go back to PC.
Yeah,
but the last time I did it, like when the Surface Pro, I can't remember which model it was, and I was like, wow, that's like sexy as like excellent, high quality, high performance PC with a touch screen. I was like, oh yeah, I've got to get back in. I was like, oh man, fucking Windows. Like, but yeah, I just recently switched off to Android for my phone, which I don't regret at all.
I was going to say, I thought you just did that to yourself again. You haven't learned your lessons, huh?
On the phone, specifically on the phone, I like Android.
Yeah. Well, sorry to hold us up here, but I think it illustrates the point that there are. It's a massive step forward as far as approachability and ease of setup and management, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And I wanted to show how you just saw that my URL did not work for the DeepWiki MCP, but if you go into their playground, you'll see that I can connect it, no problem.
Do you want to show your screen?
Yeah, I'm logging in and making sure I don't expose a bunch of things.
I'll pause.
Have you done much with OpenAI assistants?
Yeah, so a lot of the voice agent stuff that I've worked at, specifically for deploying into our iOS app, is built exclusively using the OpenAI interface. So we don't use LangChain for that. Although I am integrating Langsmith into the production deployment of those because the tracing is better. But my devs already use the OpenAI, like they're very familiar with it, so it's easier to just get them started, easier for them to go through. Plus the docs are really good when you're onboarding someone. Like the documentation setup for OpenAI APIs is excellent. And then you can share, like it's really easy to share assistants as well and share prompt setups.
Yeah, it's something that I should have more exposure to, and the more that I look at it, I'm like, yeah, this is pretty cool. It's just that I try to spend more time on the open source, I guess. I do a lot with LangChain, LangGraph, and this is assistance.
I think the key distinction is like if you want to build simple assistants, which aren't really agents, like it's like the agentic orchestration across multiple complex parts of like a business process, it would be more challenging in this environment compared to say using LangGraph.
Mm-hmm.
And where I have used this, it's using some of the killer OpenAI or ChatGPT components like voice.
Well, it's a great platform, but we talk about vendor lock, right? And that's Doesn't have as much flexibility, I don't believe.
Yeah, and some of the things like from when I've been playing with it aren't as good on the evaluation side. It's easy to get started, but Langsmith has some like more hardcore management, optimization, iteration workflows that you can execute for your actual backend.
.com playground, and here you'll notice this section that says tools. So you can create your own tool. They have some templates in here as well. And you'll see this option, MCP server. So I click that. I have mostly the same options as you saw in the ChatGPT interface, except there are some others that were not there, like Cloudflare. DeepWiki was not there. So it's kind of interesting. And what I thought was particularly interesting is the payment providers. It's like at least half of, like, right out of the gate, it's payment systems. So I think that kind of tells you something, right? So if I type in mcp.deepwiki.com and then I choose the MCP endpoint, you can also use SSE, and that's the difference between the server send events version versus MCP. So to create the MCP server with the newest streamable HTTP, it's a different build. And in fact, with ChatGPT, to create a connector, it's not necessarily the same code that you write for other clients. They've done something. I don't know if you'd consider it like a wrapper, I guess, but remember we were talking about you have options for search, deep research, and chat on the connectors. So you have to, of course, define that, and it's a custom configuration. So if I add this server, well, now you see it connected, and I have these three tools: read wiki structure, read wiki contents, and ask question. So if I say search deep wiki LangChain, and it's always fun. Yeah, that picked it up right away. But especially with some of the older models, you have to sometimes be a little bit more explicit or use the actual tool call names. So we're finally getting there where these newer models are really good at tool calling and working with MCP servers. What the other thing I didn't specifically mention was you can, at the tool level, configure whether it requires approval or not. And we talk about human in the loop. So that's a human in the loop step right there. Typically, me personally, I will set things. Previously, you would have to configure these things in the JSON file for, say, Claude Desktop or your MCP servers. But I'll typically set read-only operations as automatically approved, and then modify delete operations would require approval, right? You also mentioned the authentication. So authentication and authorization are different things. We now have both, and that allows, say you're in charge of deploying these tools at your organization, you can control that access, that role-based access control at the tool level, which is a big deal. And there are other ways you can do that, but this really streamlines things and puts it into a much more manageable context.
Yeah, so explain that nuance a little bit more. So, this is quite cool. And then you can see the calls and what's come back with. This is great. So, authorization at a tool level, and then you can have access control. Like you basically say, all right, it can do this, or it has read-only access to these actions, etc. But can you get more granular in here as well to say, well, like these, in this case, like if it was a GitHub integration, for example, these repos, it can do these, but these repos, it can only do these things. And then is the idea that you can overlay your authentication for your users on top of those? Because I'm imagining that will get very complicated very quickly, right?
Well, what's happening is you will have your clients be able to automatically discover MCP servers, and it will only present and pull in the ones that you have access to, which is what we're pretty used to in every app that we use. But that's been pretty difficult and it requires a lot of customization and to do that. So now, and again, it's not quite there, but it's a massive, massive step forward where early adopters are ready to start putting this into their organization. So
yeah, it's interesting. It's a really significant challenge. So the Glean founder talked a little bit about this. So Glean is an enterprise search product, which I would be quite worried if I was them, because now these guys are entering the game. Like OpenAI has got these integrations you're showing us now mostly into Microsoft, in addition to note taking and recording. And there's a whole bunch of like enterprise features they're releasing, right? But he basically said that one of the problems that they discovered as a result of making enterprise information more searchable was that it surfaced a bunch of pre-existing access issues that were just not problems because of the challenge of finding data. So some people, they might have a OneDrive that's got like sensitive commercial documents in it that the whole organization could access, but no one knew it existed. So they didn't go searching for it. And then all of a sudden, when everything's available, they presented all of these problems that they had to then solve. And it was actually a blocker for introducing some tools like this they had to deal with internally in stakeholder management, which is like, I don't want to do that because I'm worried what skeletons are in my closet that might then be exposed to all of my employees.
Right. Yeah,
And they
security by obscurity.
They built like an ETL pipeline that like assessed the sensitivity standard, like to say, all right, well, if this is, then we need to assess the sensitivity of this now.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm surprised. It's not like you would hear people publicize, hey, we had this internal issue. But yeah, I'm sure it happens all the time. I mean, I've seen it firsthand happen, but yeah. So, all right. Well, Tom, what do you think on the ChatGPT side? I guess before we move on, there's a tie-in with the memory as well, and I think this is a big deal. But I want to give you a chance. If you had any questions or initial thoughts on what I showed.
It looks sick. I want to play with it. I've got like a bunch of use cases for work that I'm going to use for some of those connectors already. So,
yep. So you have.
I think this is an unlock for companies like my organization where I work now is of the users that we have that are high consumption users, that everyone's on ChatGPT.
Yeah, so you have to have, there's a breakdown of the licenses that you have to have. And so again, it's targeted at team, and this is what I didn't want to happen in this space, is big feature matrices, based on licenses. So if you have team, enterprise, and education license, then you pretty much have all of these different things. And Tom, so I think the consumer pro is the consumer, right? Or plus. Yeah. So the capabilities are a little bit different depending on your license. Now, what I hadn't hit on yet was the memory piece. So last week and on a few different things, we've talked about agent memory, what the implications are. Is it good? Is it bad? What situations does it fit? Well, this ChatGPT connectors steps directly into that space when you look at the sync type connector. So you'll notice Google Drive, and I have this button to enable sync. Now, this is designed for G Suite, like the business grade. If you're using personal, you can still attach it as a one-off. But this sync connector is actually much different. All of these other connectors are essentially RAG, from what I understand. So you do a search and it goes and it searches SharePoint or it searches Teams. Well, with the Google Sync, that's going to be much more along the lines of, in terms of the way that it's processed and prepared on the back end, much more like a Mem0 or some of those agentic solutions that we were talking about. Because with the sync, they're actually pulling in your data to the OpenAI platform. So it's already gone through all that AI analysis and however they're handling that, which is, again, we were talking about IP. Well, if every business ran the G Suite Enterprise, and hooked this up, then OpenAI has basically the IP of every business. I mean, so
I'm
yeah,
assuming.
that's something I've been thinking a lot of, and the challenge I think for a lot of people is going to be if if you're in charge of AI within your organization and you've kind of been slow to adopt, and now you're going to be in this place where um, you might just have to hit the easy button. You know, um, I think it's great. The technology is amazing. I don't want to take anything away from that, but for me at least, I think there's a lot to think about, particularly if you're in charge at the organization of making that decision.
Yeah, I want to dive more into that sync functionality that they've got there and see what the details are. So if there's like if there is a vectorization of some of the data, how much of it? Is it a sync on that, or is it a sync on updates to the server, like the actual MCP server? I don't know. It's interesting.
They do have this KB, and it doesn't necessarily go as in depth as the the research papers we've discussed and things like that. But it's well worth the read. I think this is the section you're asking about.
Indexing for cert. Yeah, okay, right. So there must be some sort of interaction with their vector store on your account, or there must be something. And that's currently not like they just do that. You don't have to pay extra or manage the storage and stuff. So it's cool. I wonder if OpenAI want to be the core AI subscription in anyone's life, whether you're a business or a person, right? And so much of the interaction that we have, which we'll talk about this when we get into the agent conversation in a moment, the interaction patterns that we have is now being embedded into these apps via a chat interface or artifacts that you create and other things. I wonder over time, will it just basically abstract into these interfaces, and these become the place where all of the work gets done out into other productivity tools like a G Suite or like the Microsoft stack over time, because the interface and the place where we go, it's search, it's also productivity, it's writing, it's communication, it's project management, it's sharing, it's everything. And this is one step in that direction.
Yeah. I mean, when the CEO of Microsoft essentially says this is the death of he didn't say it this way, these are my own words, but it's like the death of the it's like the death of the application traditional web interface, right? That probably that's not something that someone in his position could go out and just kind of on a whim say. Like, there's some weight behind that, and I think he's absolutely right. If you have your applications run on a database, well, you just link your AI tools to the database, and you don't necessarily need an interface. It's going to speed up the amount of customization and like user personalization and preferences by a lot. And it'll be really impactful in organizations that specialize in integrations and consulting as well.
I do agree with that. He's talking his book there, but the evidence does show, like, before the AI breakout, there weren't a lot of big enterprise software companies being built. All of the major ones had already been built. There wasn't much more breakout activity. And I think that's because the environment had been created around that standard.
Mm-hmm.
In this environment, those were tools being built that people plugged into. Now we have software that acts more like an employee. So you don't necessarily need the abstraction software layer above that entity. The software paradigm is changing, and it's completely different to, enterprise software where you click around and you have all your documents stored somewhere, and you have like a calendar somewhere, and you have, Jira tickets stored somewhere. Maybe it'll all just be interfaced with in a centralized, AI stack.
Yep.
I think the real implication for companies is like, well, where is all of my company data then going? Like, the lock-in, like that is like a greater level of lock-in than I think anyone's ever experienced, perhaps outside of maybe the cloud infrastructure layer, at least in the software domain.
I totally agree. And just to put these solutions together, like an agentic framework and your vector stores and all this, I mean, the number of APIs and disparate cloud systems is going to be insane. I mean, it is insane. And I mentioned it last week. It's going to be really tough until some good solutions develop for the people who are in charge of data governance and things like that.
Yeah. The application creation is non-trivial, but I think the application experience is going to be completely different to what we're used to. I think enterprise SaaS is basically dead.
Yep.
But building these kinds of agentic enterprise applications will definitely be an area that expands rather than contracts. Like, I'm just interested.
Well, the downside is I can't remember if I said it while we're going here, but I ran out of deep research credits, which is a huge bummer because I had some workflows that I wanted to show, and I can't do it until I think it's June 17th. So
I've loaded up credits. So yeah.
Once my account refreshes on deep research credits, then I'll record a video or something to put on there.
I'm maxed out on Anthropic, so I'm just absolutely going for it on Anthropic at the moment. And
Claude 4 really didn't help that. And I upgraded. I don't know what version you have, but I upgraded to the $100 one just the other day because I was like, this is so frustrating.
I was using it to get set up and try and execute a few Swift components in a voice agent on a Swift app, an iOS app. And I was doing configuration. I was doing a range of different things. And then I exposed it to the code base and asked it to develop a plan and execute on the initial kind of features. And in that was about a 40 to 30 minute session. And I burnt 12 million tokens.
12 million. Wow.
12 million tokens.
Hey, don't feel bad though. That was me with Devin. I spent $1.5 million in one day. So
what an agent.
That's what it felt like. Yeah, I looked and it was...
do you know what I mean? Like that is a large amount of so it puts it into context. Say when you look at OpenRouter, I don't know if you ever go into OpenRouter.
Yeah, I actually use OpenRouter primarily. Yeah.
But they have a leaderboard. They're like, right, what are the token rates going out to the different apps? Like Klein and, a bunch of the other ones are on there. Usually in the billions of tokens. But if someone's burning 12 million tokens just on a dev configuration and a little bit of a chat back and forth around with an app, it's actually not that much usage in actual user patterns if everyone's burning through that stuff. Anyway, that's
kind of to tie, the MCP thing. One thing that I think is underrated and probably not enough development on for these types of solutions, but it's a real opportunity for offloading your processing. And there are a lot of things you can run in the background with it via the MCP server. So it's not having to pass everything back to your LLM. And I could see creating systems that are meant to optimize, like you mentioned OpenRouter, you can configure their gateway to say, I want to prioritize the provider based on like performance or price, or things like that. So I could see that coming to other.
And once you're at scale, right? Like a couple of billion tokens in the context of like some of the big players is basically nothing. Like that's what we saw from the Google keynote, right? They're in the 50, 60 trillion tokens a month, something like that. Once you have something that works in production, the pipeline optimization, right, is you get to this point, you're like, all right, let's go through an optimization step. And that's why in Langsmith, I think it's good because they've brought in those other metrics around the optimization, which is like latency cost, number of tool calls, where it falls down, how many tokens it burns on each turn. And then you can actually go through the tracing process and just say, all right, well, here, the outcome is good based on the evaluation set and the live evals that you got coming through. But here is where we're burning through the tokens. All right, let's go through the optimization step by step. So there is a process flow you can go through, but just me as my in my chaos monkey state, just like burning through tokens. It's kind of pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's insane. I don't have as much familiarity with the OpenAI evaluations I don't, like, is it comparable in that sense where you can?
It's not as fine grained. It's not as, in my opinion, it's not as good, but it's easy. It's really fast and it's easy. So you can pull things in, run quick evaluations. It's a good place to start. It's actually a really good place to learn, I think, if you're new to starting building these apps. If you want to just pull in a bunch of your own chat interactions with an assistant you might be building in the logs from the logs in the OpenAI playground, API playground, and run a quick evaluation just to understand it. But it's not as fine grained. You can't dive really into what the agent is doing when and how in the same way that you can in Langsmith. I think Langsmith is probably the standard for that.
Exactly. And I guess I was speaking more to the tracing more than the evaluations themselves. But I don't know. I'll have to dive into it. Stay tuned. I'll let you know my thoughts at some point.
All right, let's jump into the Open Agent platform and talk about agents. So in this section, we're going to do a bit of a demo of Open Agent platform, which is one of those things that flew under the radar from Langsmith, from Langchain, pardon me, Open Agent kind of platform environment. And then I want to talk about how to think about identifying good agent opportunities, whether it's a business you work in, if you're an entrepreneur, or if you are looking at ways to, I guess, change certain interaction patterns for some of your team whilst bringing in agentic workflows, which I think will be an interesting conversation.
Okay, Tom, so here I just wanted to show, we were going over the ChatGPT connectors, and almost at the exact same time, Anthropic put out what they're calling integrations. So really the same thing. They're MCP servers at the end of the day. This is the Claude desktop app. And down here, you can see all of these MCP servers they look official, right? They have logos. Well, these are all remote hosted MCP servers. So this is what's going to be coming by storm. If I look, okay, I actually cleaned this up the other day. We were talking about Pulse MCP, right? So this is a local server that I installed on my computer. You notice it doesn't have the logo. But what you also don't get, and I think this is a big deal because I've been waiting for something like this. You'll notice I just switched over to Claude.ai, their web app. Well, now your remote hosted MCP servers are available in the web app as well. So you see, I don't have that Pulse MCP server because it's just on my computer. So you can see how this creates much bigger portability and ease of management. But at the end of the day, it's pretty much the same thing. Of course, there's the nuances of SSE versus streamable HTTP and how you configure those, but very similar interface. You go add your connectors. You can add your custom connectors. And in this case, so this DeepWiki GPT, this is a custom remote MCP server that I set up on Cloudflare. It's really the same as the official DeepWiki, but I added authentication to this one for testing, and I just wanted to make sure I could add it into my Claude. So I think that's pretty cool. So you can, if you're a company, you can of course use these pre-built or the ones that come in the app, but you can create your own custom servers and you can deploy it on secure remote infrastructure. And so this, I could talk all day about it, but I won't for everybody else's sake. But this is a huge deal. This is a really big deal. So,
and so you still reckon like the best workflow is, particularly for Claude, is like using is it Pulse MCP as the marketplace to sort of identify good MCPs to use, good, reliable.
Yeah, but do you remember they announced the MCP registry? So Pulse MCP is that kind of one of the leaders in that space as far as they've scraped. I believe they just scraped the internet for MCP servers, and that's a temporary solution. But they've joined the steering committee for MCP, and they're creating a actual registry. So you can go out there and download a Docker app. So I've set it up, but there's a lot of work to be done there. But my point is, Tom, Pulse MCP is awesome, but the way that is set up is a temporary thing, and that will change.
Okay.
And then when we talk about app marketplaces, integration marketplaces, the registry idea will be huge.
Yeah. Kind of like an NPM, like a package manager, like environment, at least that on the dev front.
Yep. And if you want to, we can switch over to the LangChain Open Agent platform, and I'll just drop a nice little transition. Is that it's not directly listed on the Open Agent platform project, but they have a universal tool server. And what that does, the idea is very similar to what I was just talking about. It's like a registry, essentially. So in Open Agent platform, instead of manually configuring a bunch of your servers, you register your MCP servers with the tool server, and then on the agent side, you just give them one link, and that's to your tool server. So very different than how we're managing it today. And you can go out there, and it's very easy to set up. Go ahead.
Is this new? Like, has this been around for a while? Or is it universal tool server?
This is another thing I haven't seen any announcements about it. I'm sure they have, but I just found this by I guess I'm
Packages.
like super nerd because I just go scan GitHub, and that's how.
Yeah, well, the last update was last week, but it's, some of these things were committed 3 months ago, so it must have been around for a while. But yeah, it's got hardly any stars. This is cool.
Right. So
There's
you'll
so
see
much, the LangChain like ecosystem. There's just so much stuff.
It is. Yeah. So it doesn't. I don't believe it directly. These two projects reference each other anywhere, but they're directly connected. So I'll jump over to Open Agent platform.
Yeah, it's probably worth setting up Open Agent platform released by LangChain team. The whole idea behind this is they have their open source packages and then their products on top of them. Their goal is to basically make agents ubiquitous all the way through, life and the economy and work everywhere. That's the whole idea. So part of that, they said, is like they have good developer adoption of their different tooling. But one of the things that they don't really have as much of is this, people like me, slightly outside of the core developer group, like yourself, Cameron, I'd say you're a core developer, or I'm like developer adjacent, got some skills, but it's still not that easy for someone with not as many technical skills to get started on LangChain. And then there's another group outside of that they call the citizen developer group, which is basically people who want to build agents, maybe solve some problems that need to be enabled with more consumer-like tools. And so these initiatives are sort of aimed at making it easier and clearer for people to get started with agents. So someone who's a core developer might enable something like this, an open agent platform, internally within their business, whatever. And then you can get some of those developer adjacent people to come in and start building agents and creating those things and working as a team. So that's the whole intent, right?
Yeah, nailed it. I also think it's good for developers too. I've already started using this for rapid prototyping and proof of concept type of ideas. So I don't think it's necessarily limited to just the citizen developer, but of course that's what it's aimed at. But what we have is a full stack, just all the basic components that you typically build separately, all wrapped into, well, I shouldn't say one package. It's actually 3 different GitHub projects, I believe, to set this up. But essentially, it's everything wrapped together that you need for that basic laying the foundation. And tools are a big part of that. So they've integrated the MCP with Streamable HTTP directly into this Open Agent platform, which is amazing. So, Tom, I don't know, have you played with it at all?
I played briefly with the hosted version. So there's a hosted version that you can just go and muck around with. And then I started going down the path of setting it up. Once I got through like the first repo And then I started setting up the secondary repos for the agents. So you have like the agents in there, then loaded it up into my LangGraph account. Once I got to that point, I was like, I think Cameron needs to show this off, not me.
Yeah. So this is the hosted version, and you'll notice at the top it says demo. But this is awesome because you don't have to set anything up. You just go to oap.langchain.com, create a login, and then you can start creating your agents. So what they've done is they put out a templated supervisor agent and a templated React agent that you use as a template. So you can customize that template. In my case, I've just deployed the standard and then relied on adding tools. But it's a pretty, I guess it depends on the person, but I think this is a pretty intuitive, straightforward interface in comparison to a lot of the other things I've seen. But you'll see that I've already created some custom agents. It starts off blank, but to create your agents, you just click new agent, and then you have the standard fields to fill in, like a lot of them, your name, your description, what model you want to use. So you can configure this. Well, you could technically configure it with any models that you'd like, but out of the box, natively, it's Anthropic and OpenAI integrations. So you set all your criteria, create a system prompt, and then the real game changer here. These are your MCP tools. So, man, there's not enough time because the arcade. We've talked about arcade, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Arcade, so, the MCP kind of integrator toolkit. It's a paid tool, but yeah.
Right. So what they've deployed in the demo version is an arcade server that hosts all of these tools. And this is not included in if you go deploy this yourself, you'll have to figure out how to set this up. It's not in the instructions, but they give you a little taste of it here. So this is one MCP server that provides the orchestration and integration for whatever providers that you'd like. So this is actually really, really long list. There are a lot of cool tools in here, all the way from Notion to, there's even Microsoft. You can send emails, draft emails. You can set different permissions if you don't want it to accidentally send emails. So just out of the box on this demo, you can, if you're creative, you can create some really powerful things.
That's really cool.
With zero code. People say no code, and in my opinion, a lot of those no code solutions are still pretty complicated. In fact, for me, sometimes I'm like, it's just easier to write the code than navigate this weird GUI,
Yeah. Well, I think what would be, do you want to, this is all the tools. Yeah, cool.
Yep. So these are all the different tools. Of course, you can click on, you can get a little bit of information about the tool call name and what that does, or you can just test out that tool specifically. And then the RAG. Have you ever built a RAG system? Yeah. So there are quite a few different steps there, as far as all the way from like the chunking and splitting to vectorization, how you store it. There's a lot of design details, and there's out of the box templates you can use. But if you're really trying to do something domain specific and customized, that's a project in itself. So here they've deployed a RAG server. That's one component of this, and it's literally create a collection, and then you can upload your files, and it takes care of those embeddings. And then you give your agents access to that.
So it comes with an embedding tool, or you have to use like the OpenAI, you use the OpenAI embeddings model and then push it to you have to set up a local data store, Mongo or Pinecone or pgvector or something like that.
It's using OpenAI embeddings out of the box, but where LangChain started is providing that flexibility. That's their entire thing, right? So you can customize it to use, say, if you wanted to use Ollama local embeddings or
Actually, I think, wasn't it this tool's set up when I was going through the workflow processes that you have to have a Superbase. I think you have to have a Superbase account linked to this to do the authentication. So
Yeah.
you can have users log in, but it's all synced up to
I'm glad
Superbase. You can customize it, but then you have to build your own stuff on top.
Exactly. There's just too much here, Tom. You're exactly right. The integration with Superbase out of the box, and then you can customize that. If you've ever built integration or authentication, done anything with authentication, it's can get really messy. It's really hard. So they provided this out of the box. So in this case, you just set up a Superbase account, you get the API key, and then it automatically connects and takes care of everything in the background. So it makes it super easy for that. I was talking about the RAG collections. So these are, you'll notice, these are the same collections that I created manually, and I had some documents uploaded there. So you control, if I wanted this new agent to have access only to QuickBooks, then I assign it there. Now, this is a demo environment. One thing that I've already run into is if you change your vector stores or you like delete them, you have to go, and actually the same goes for tools. You have to reconfigure each one of those agents. And so in the self-deployed, self-hosted version, they have scripts that you have to run to update the agents. So quick note on that. So Tom, on this hosted version, I was trying to get really crazy, and I wanted to show, I wanted to highlight that you can still set up essentially sub agents. The part you don't have in the demo is the visibility into the graph visualizations and tracing in the background. So with this version, you can't log into Langsmith and see all those traces and everything. That's hosted on their side. But if you deploy your own agents and then connect, then you can, and I'll show that. So I have a self-hosted version.
Well,
but
I guess
set up was this build supervisor. Let me see if I can
keep pulling that up. I guess the idea of this is if you're going to use it as a tool would be you as the developer can manage agents that you've created, push them, host them on LangGraph Cloud, and then publish them to this interface where business users could then go and build more detailed or extensions of those agents, right? So they won't be able to see the tracing, but this is like but you could still manage all of that stuff as a developer in the background.
Exactly. So in this instance, you don't have it doesn't make it easy to see visually, but I have what I called build supervisor. So I uploaded some docs related to our podcast and things like that. This is like the master supervisor. And so when you configure your supervisor agents down here at the bottom, you select which agents that supervisor controls or is the supervisor of. And you'll notice I created a research supervisor separately. So the research supervisor orchestrates a set of 3 agents that do specialized processes for research. So it's like essentially like a subgraph, right? A supervisor orchestrating another supervisor, and you can have groups. But that's once you start going that direction, you really need to be able to see things. So,
well, do you mind opening that again so we can check out the system prompt a little bit? But yeah, so the idea of that is you can interact with it and then enable it with tools that are effectively agents, but also other agents that execute certain predefined scopes of work. And then you in the back end have a LangGraph set up where you defined the nodes and like basically define the graph, I assume. That's cool. This is sick, mate. I might have to get you to set up a build agent, open agent instance for me so I can play with it.
That's what I did. So yeah, we can talk about that.
I already did that, you idiot.
Demos.build. Yep. So just to show the self-hosted version. So like I said, I'll try to pull up. If you go to the quick start, you'll notice you start going through these directions, and there are 3 different projects. So you have the open agent platform repository, but it doesn't necessarily have a lot of instructions on it. It's really the quick start guide. On here, you'll notice Lang Connect. So Lang Connect is the RAG server. So you have to deploy that separately. The good thing is it's pretty straightforward to set up. This runs in Docker. So in my instance, just at my house for testing, I set up a server for this, like a separate dedicated server running on Docker. Okay. Tom, are you interested in walking through any of the details for like how to set this up? I didn't necessarily think we'd go through like a step by step, but
no, I think that's enough. Unless you want to dive into it more.
I think it's pretty straightforward, and
yeah,
they've done a pretty good job with the documentation here on this one. But just to show the difference, you'll notice. So this is my self-hosted version, localhost. But it's the same. It's the same thing. But now, if I go over to Langsmith, okay, I was just going to show the Langsmith LangGraph side of this on the self-deployed version. So you'll see I have OAP tools agent and an OAP supervisor. These are just the pre-builts that they put out there. Technically, you should be able to deploy these in one graph, but the instructions set them up separately. I think there are pros and cons to both approaches. And yeah, I plan to
open more of those in the studio just to preview it.
Let's do the supervisor. This is the view that you're talking about in the studio. Yeah. So
I don't think not many people can actually go and use this. Like just go and actually visualize the agents that they're building. I think it's one of the best parts of it.
Yeah, and this is a development tool, right? So
yeah.
You talked about citizen developers. You're probably not going to be doing much on this side, but this is a really powerful tool while you're designing your agents. You can visualize the whole workflow. So I'll say, call deep research or DeepWiki. I guess I showed the OpenAI playground. It's really pretty much the same thing as far as this part goes.
Yeah. And it's this fine-grained kind of interaction. Once you get very complicated graphs, very complicated interactions, that's the key, right?
Yep.
You can see the number of tenants, you see what it's doing, yeah.
Yeah, that's odd. That's like the exact same thing that I just typed. So again, this is pretty much stock out of the box. There's still prompt engineering that you need to do to make this really work. But let's try that again. So this is the user interface side, web interface. If you deploy it out to people, this is what they see. On the back side, let me just try that same one again. This is the tool you can use to develop on. And if you have tools added, see how it just jumps and expanded the supervisor node. It's really cool when you have multi-agent graphs and subgraphs to see that expansion, and it really helps me out quite a bit. So
yeah.
in classic demo form, that's a weird.
I don't have DeepWiki. That's great.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Oh, no. You know what? That actually makes sense. Because, that's interesting. Because your MCP servers are connected to the OAP, I guess like the main interface, the orchestrator.
Right. But not the actual individual agent on LangGraph, LangGraph Cloud.
Right. So that actually makes sense. So, see, with these things, there can be a lot of nuances, and that really impact the way that you design these systems. No, my internet's running slow apparently or something, but
what I love over there is like you can see the counts, right? And the tracing.
Right.
So immediately you've got stats on the individual agents. You can see the costs. Yeah.
So it'll take a second to load, but here's what we'll see in the background. It delegated to the DeepWiki agent, transferred over there, used the DeepWiki to read wiki structure tool, and then passes it back to the supervisor. Like, okay, I'm done. I did my job. What's next? And then if you have additional agents, This is where you can start building out workflows. And if you want to take it as far as you can even like statically program things in the system prompts to make an automatic workflow that continues to run. That's all possible even in this no code version. Okay, so this is the tracing that we were attempting to look at, and you'll see all the details. And in this instance, this is just for the tools agent. And that's where, in some cases, that might be good if you only want to see the work of individual agents. A lot of cases, I set things up so I can see the entire process. But of course, if you're deploying really complex architectures, then you might want it separated out. And then from here, this is not part of it necessarily, but the Langsmith, this is where you can take those traces and create data sets to do your evaluations. And
Yeah,
that's really,
I want to do
really cool.
a big deep dive on that. I think we should do that sooner rather than later, because it's such a core part of building these agentic apps. I know everyone's talking about it, but it's very true. That's great, man. Thanks for showing me that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to be clear on the, like those agents you were showing on Langsmith, right? Back here, so this one or whatever, second opinion, OAP supervisor, those calls, like, so those runs, that's for an open, like those metrics are not all you, right? Well, they are.
What do you mean they're all me?
Like, have you forked the second opinion OAP supervisor? Like, is that a forked kind of agent GitHub repo that you forked? Or have you actually put 31 million tokens through it? On the right-hand side there.
Holy shit. I didn't even notice that. Is that right?
$78. So 31 million tokens is a lot. So it's been run 19.
But I have not even, I set this up, this version last night. I have not run that much. That can't be right.
So that's sort of what, like, is it like a Langsmith tracing, like, is it shared? Are those metrics shared? Because it's a shared repo? Because it's just a dummy example one, right? Or if it's yours, you might want to get on that.
It wouldn't work that way because it's all tied to threads.
Right. Okay. So it is you.
Well, I'll let you know what I find out. But that's
another reason why using Langsmith is good.
I don't believe
Did you see that they've got those alerts as well? So you can set up alerts on these things.
I don't believe that that's true. That cannot be. A good call out. I don't know. I don't know what's going on here, man. Blame it on the Windows, I guess.
It's all right. Do you want to transition to talking about agents? Agent. Yeah. That was a sick demo. Thank you.
And so I didn't share. I have quite a few things related to that I believe I can put on public on GitHub. So if people want to experiment, might make it a little bit easier. But maybe even this demo environment, maybe we'll set that up on the .build, let people play with it.
Yeah, that'd be great. In the comments, we got a couple of comments back this week, and one of the guys from the LangChain community said that some of our links were busted. So sorry about that. I will fix all of those up, and we'll put all of the links into the show notes so you can go and play with this stuff. Cool. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, Cameron, was I want to go through and just quickly talk about like how to think about identifying opportunities for agentic applications. I think it could be worthwhile just spending a bit of time talking through those things. And I've got 2 data sets that I think can be helpful. I'd be interested for people to play with them. I think you would love diving into this data. But the reason why I think it's important is because we have seen agentic kind of workflows be adopted in certain industries a lot, right? The first domino to fall was effectively coding at the higher end of the wage curve and the more complicated area of sort of like application. And the lower area were things like digital, online, or phone-based customer support. And one of the reasons for that is because it was a very deterministic kind of outcome, like the code runs or it doesn't. The customer has their problem solved or they don't. And those 2 areas sort of fallen. But next, like what we're all kind of looking for, like, well, what are the next areas where agentic applications will really like make a massive difference and be adopted in a wide scale way. And also, if you are working, like, so there's two ways to think about this. Like, if you're an entrepreneur thinking about where you should start a business, or if you're someone who's deploying capital thinking about how you should do that, that's one area. And, that's like a reason why you need to think about this. But also, if you're people like us, you're working in bigger companies, or if you're thinking of going and working somewhere, or if you're tasked with sort of adopting AI through your organization, like, how should you think about it? How should you think about getting the most effective outcome of like output of an agentic system? That's another reason why I think it's important. So it's not just like for startups building startups, it's also for just regular people like us, regular folks. So that's why I wanted to have a chat with you about it. Is this something that you've thought about much, or like when you talk to people about how to build these systems? Like, is it?
Yeah, of course. And the first place my mind goes is almost like the hype. And you kind of get in trouble when you start using these buzzwords so often, because now you have everybody is like, I need agents. And then in a lot of cases, maybe it's just a simple workflow automation that doesn't use AI at all. Right. So I think that's the challenge, is determining what is truly agentic and where does it actually fit. Because we talked about, like, you have to control yourself a little bit with all these amazing technologies that are coming out. If you're like us, you just want to run to it and say, oh yeah, this is the answer, let's do this. But um in a, that's fine personally, but in a business environment, not how you go about it, right?
Yeah. I think there is some evidence, and I saw some of that recently, that some of the enterprise investment is slowing down in AI. I think a lot of CIOs, CTOs must have gotten burnt in the first kind of year or two when they spent a bunch of cash and none of it really occurred, which is the classic, like, trough of disillusionment kind of space. But in this domain, I think the tools have accelerated ahead in the agentic space, and then big companies like Salesforce are getting behind it, right? What I want to do is sort of lay out a framework where people can think about, what is it? Is it possible? What can I expect? And then how to go about building an agentic application to validate my hypothesis in this space, so that you can do it with relatively low risk and also identify the right areas within an organization to attack. So what I want to do or use to do that is there's a couple of different data sets. The two main ones that I want to talk through with you are, there's a piece of work that was done by A16 and Z a while back on their enterprise team, where they went through and I always mispronounce this, is the NAICS code analysis. That's like a US government census kind of analysis of different industries, as a basic way to frame up the market, which is basically to say, like, for an agentic application which has semi-autonomous or completely autonomous kind of elements to it enabled by AI, what are the target industries, target activities, target areas, and what's the size of the prize? Like, what are you actually talking about in terms of either optimizing operational expense or expanding the team for those businesses so they can go and steal share off their competitors? That's sort of the reason. That's how how I think about it anyway. And then you can use data like that, which I'll show you in a second, to kind of understand what kind of application you should deploy, whether it should be fully autonomous down in one end, or more of a augmented kind of implementation, based on how complex the tasks are, based on the nature of the people who work in those roles in those businesses. And then on top of that, the Anthropic AI Economic Impact Index project is really good for this, because they take it from the other path, which is basically they say, well, everyone's using AI and they've open sourced or published on Hugging Face the data set around, the analysis they did on about 1 million chat conversations. And then they identified all of the kinds of tasks those people were interacting on the basis of, the engagement that they had in that chat. And then they tried to align that with these US Department of Labor definitions of tasks and occupations that match them. So you can get a sense of, like, well, what's the adoption rate in certain occupations for AI engagement in a chat interface? And then you can look at it and go, well, if I can elevate components of that into an agentic application, then I've got a degree of adoption pattern within those roles already. So that's more at the role level. And I think with those two data sets, you could basically start building a picture of, like, well, in this industry, this is the size of the prize, this is the kind of app. In this industry, these kinds of roles. All right, and how are those people actually using AI? So you can match it up pretty well. I haven't done all of that matching here, but I've got a few things I want to talk you through. I reckon if we publish it, like they published this so that other researchers could do this work, and there are a lot of other researchers in there. But I think for us, it's an interesting data set to dive into, to play with. So this is, the A16Z article. It came out a while ago now, so it's not particularly it's almost 6 months ago. But basically they tried to take the approach of looking at areas where AI systems will take up the slack in the labor market. The primary thing that they used was this data set here, which is basically a code level analysis of companies in this kind of code. So in this, petroleum and petrol product merchant wholesalers, how many firms are there? What's the total sales rate? How many employees are there, and what's the revenue per employee? Which can give you a benchmark of, what the kind of AI applications they use. That would be suitable for that kind of cohort. And then the total size of the prize in terms of the payoff and the number of firms you have to sell to. So for example, monetary authorities like central banks, there's 12. There's only 12. As defined by them. Petroleum refineries, there's only 65. Whereas car wholesalers, there's 5,000 in this economic environment, which is defined as America. But I find it interesting to visualize this kind of data to sort of analyze this. So what I might do is show you this set here. So when you actually stack it up this is like a Tableau. Do you use Tableau at all for data stack?
I used to, not as much lately.
So if you want to dive into this, you can. I'll publish this on Tableau, public cloud, but then also the Anthropic data set is a Jupyter notebook. You can recreate how they do their analysis. But this gives you a sense of each of these things. So on the bottom here, it's the total number of firms in the market. On this axis is basically the revenue per employee. And so the A16 and Z guys were saying revenue per employee kind of denotes more Copilot style implementations occur up here.
Mm-hmm.
Down here, it's more automation standards. So for example, in healthcare and social assistance work, you want to implement more automation tooling, because the prioritization of organizations within that cohort is more about efficiency gains within their existing workforce, as in replacement or automation. Whereas up here, it's more about augmentation and getting more out of the people with the expertise if the revenue number is higher per employee. That's their analysis. So it's a good way to look at the kinds of AI tooling and agentic applications to implement by sector, and then also just how much is there. So for example, wholesale trade, that's a very large market, right? That's a top level group. It's a bit probably better just to look at it by individual industries. So these are all of the individual, subsectors types, and you can see the kinds of. I've changed up the axis a little bit for you, but you can see it here.
So the data set, it's really just the raw NAICS data, or did they provide a layer of analysis?
I think they did the revenue per employee component. I don't know. It's not every code is in there. But it's basically just it's a shorthand way. If you were going to do a process like this, that was really in depth, you'd get more of the data out, right? And this is just what they published on that blog post. But it's basically just what's the concentration rate? How many firms are there? How much do they sell? And then money per employee. Thinking about the kinds of things. So this is the construction domain, or you can go into education, for example. So your education, these are the individual kinds of education institutions within the education sector. So what I was showing you before is the total number, whereas this is the actual individual area. And then the revenue per employee, what you're trying to get to, and then the total value of the sales and the value of sales on the right-hand side. I actually made the actual number of employees here. So technical and trade schools was a classic one, or educational support services. It's about a $16 billion industry. Revenue per employee is about $158,000 a year per employee. But the total number is really high, right? So if you can implement agentic applications into that specific segment and either reduce the total number of required employees or increase their productivity via automation, then within those firms, they could either capture more share, and there's about 8,000 of them in the market right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it's an interesting tool to use. It's like, all right, well, it also gives number one, it's an interesting tool to use in terms of like trying to understand, all right, where you sit and what's the opportunity for you when you think about agentic applications. Just it also just raises, like, opens up the aperture for me in terms of like if software really is going to be services, like that's where we're going, then the aperture of opportunity for building these kinds of applications is really mind-bendingly large when you look at these things, right? Because software can now do, and it is going to be doing more of the work that people have historically been doing. And behind every single one of those bubbles is a multi-billion-dollar market with all sorts of opportunities for people building agentic applications. That's the other thing that I find exciting about it. Do you have any questions on that? And then I'll talk through the
So this
the
is,
Anthropic.
yeah, I guess. So this is like revenue and employee count is essentially what this data
Total,
consists of. I
yeah,
mean,
total value of sales, yeah, total revenue. I think this is a few years old now, so it's like 2020 data. Revenue per employee on the vertical, and then number of employees as the size. So, and it's a logarithmic scale because you look at like restaurants, and restaurants is absolutely enormous. The next part of the analysis is where we can identify like, well, what are the more suitable tasks and roles in these different segments to take on with agentic workflows. So, for example, thinking about agentic applications that are industry specific is one thing, but then how do you create, or you can go the other way, which is creating a horizontal strategy where your agentic workload picks up specific components of an activity within all of these organizations or within a cohort of organizations. Mm-hmm. That might be, for example, Toast is a classic business that's out there that's picked up payments, bookings, etc. for restaurants.
Right. Well, this is amazing. I mean, it's pretty high level, but it tells a story and it gives you something to start with to dive in. So from my position, like I always want to know about IT, or just technology maturity of an organization, right? So even within each one of those dots, there are going to be massive ranges of organizations that are like pen and paper today versus they already have some type of system deployed, and that's going to be a much different situation for those organizations. So on this map, they sit in the same spot, but there's like so much variety under each one of those.
It also gives you there's a lot of variety. It also gives you a sense of the, if I go to this one, which is showing like number of firms as well on the bottom here, number of firms and median revenue per employee. It also gives you a sense of the go-to-market strategy you're going to have to take, because it would necessitate you building agentic workflows and systems that are highly customized and tailored when the number of firms is concentrated, because your sales motion will be an enterprise motion, as opposed to any execution that occurs down in, say, this quadrant down here where the median revenue per employee is low and the number of firms is incredibly high. Then that's where vertical centric businesses will probably just emerge around agents that are targeted at those industries. And obviously we're seeing a lot of those, like, whether it's an industry specific one or a task specific one like Sierra, you would then expect those firms to target those and go horizontal and actually just go into the vertical. So you should probably, it depends on what you're comfortable with. Whereas my experience, I'm much more comfortable in the enterprise domain. So targeting specific ones. So the industry that I work in now, for example, real estate, if I just go real estate, it's real estate and finance is here. So it's sort of middle of the pack, right? But then the subsector, which my company targets, is in the appraisal and valuation domain. And their actual median revenue per employee is actually significantly higher because it's a qualified skill. Like you need a specific qualification for it. And so therefore it's much more, and this is played out with our execution of agentic kind of workflows, played out, it's much more copilot augmentation related. It's much more effective for that. Cool. I'll publish this and you can play with it. You can try it out.
Cool. The Tableau dashboard.
Yeah. You can try it. The next thing I want to show you is, all right, thinking about so that's like top down. Where should you actually attack the market from a like a sector perspective. This work from Anthropic around like their economic index. Did you read this paper? I know I referenced it a while back. It's quite interesting because it takes the bottoms up approach, which is, all right, for their usage patterns, what are the top titles of people who are using Claude day to day, and what are the top tasks that they're executing on, right? And as we would see, it makes perfect sense, particularly with Anthropic, that like developers are the dominant like community within there. Did you dive into this research much?
It's been, I read it when it came out, but I don't remember. Like, this is really good to recap a few months down the road, especially with the tie-in.
Yeah. So the couple of things I want to highlight. So there's the blog posts and things on their website. Then there's this Anthropic economic index data set where they publish all of the data within it. It's anonymized data around the tasks that they perform. And then they updated this recently, the data set, with clusters of task types and the description of what they're actually trying to achieve when they're trying to go through using the chat within Claude to actually execute a task, which then gives you more color and richness over the top of those individual tasks and buckets of tasks. So you can see, all right, well, what was the end state goal and what's the higher level kind of, what's the higher level outcome that the user is pushing towards. So that's number 2, which they recently released in this data set here, which I'll show you is here. Cluster level data, just here. And that's fascinating because it gives you that higher level understanding. But then beneath each of those, they also published the percentage of that task when it appears in the data set, the percentage of interaction around augmentation or automation that occurs. So you can actually dive into the data to figure out, all right, for this specific task, how much of, I'll come back to that one, how much of that user's interaction was basically focused, yeah, here it is. How much of that for that particular task and that group of tasks that a Claude user comes to Anthropic for, how much of it was focused on automations. And an example here is like, all right, format this technical documentation for me in Markdown. It's like, I want you to do this. I'm not really involved. And then they've given you a percentage score across all of those task types that people come to Claude for and the groupings between automation requests versus augmentation requests, where, all right, let's draft this together, but I want to be in the loop. And so that can guide your thinking around, all right, if I want to attack a certain market segment, or if I am in a certain domain and I want to create agentic applications, you can break down the individual tasks and you can actually see the distribution set of augmentation versus automation to guide your thinking around product design when you're thinking about building an agent system, which I thought was fascinating. And all of this has been published, so you can just dive into the data set right now. So what I'm hoping to do with this, and then I can share some of these other Tableau dashboards, is you can marry up the two. You can say, right, well, this is the area I want to go into, or I want to match up, say, two industries within that data set. What are the kind of roles? What are the kind of tasks they do? And what's the distribution of augmentation versus automation requests that they make? And then they also break it down between the kinds of augmentation versus the kinds of automation tasks. So directive, format this for me. I'm not going to ask you anymore. Or an automation task where there's a feedback loop. Format this and then come back to me because I'm then going to give you further instruction. And that's then going to be an automation loop. And that can inform the kinds of agent design patterns that you put into place for a certain kind of industry. Because you could say, all right, well, for this part, just like what you were just showing with LangGraph, have an agent design pattern around these tasks that hands off to an agent design pattern around these tasks, which are still part of what that person does day to day. But I know when they need to be involved, or at least I've got a clue, I've got a signal to say I need to get the human involved here. And then you've got a place to drive off from to iterate and build your MVP, right? It's an amazing resource when you consider that they've just made this free and open out there.
Yeah, it makes me, reminds me of like mapping tools and design patterns essentially to like similar data like this, but it would be interesting to take, because that's essentially what you're saying is you can break down the types of tasks and then take it even a step further. Okay, what tools do you need to do those tasks? And I won't give away too much. Like, I've worked on that actually quite a bit. So I think you're spot on. Like, this provides a lot of insights and it informs the way that you
Mm.
go about this. I'm really interested
Or
to go back and check this out.
at least it's a starting point, right? Because like we all know that this is just the start. Like as soon as you dive into a job that someone does, like it is way more complicated than anyone really describes on a piece of paper. You know, it always is. There's always nuance. There's always, you know, pattern recognition. There's all sorts of things in there, but at least it gives you a clue. The other thing that I thought was cool about this is this adoption pattern across occupations. So this is just a graph, which is like, all right, at the point, like 4% of occupations have 75% of the related tasks that they do at a high level definition automated to some degree within their data set, just around chat. And then you go up the adoption curve. Now you can read this in two different ways. Like you could either start here and say, well, I'm just going to enter this domain and look at the occupations that have this high penetration rate. Or you can dive into this data and actually say, well, this occupation here has 25% of their tasks automated, but that may only be because no one has built like the correct integrations for the tools that they need in order to augment more. But at least it gives you a signal that those occupations have a propensity to use AI tools, and they're in that space. So, you know, just picking one here and driving them up the adoption curve may be the correct strategy. Another one might be, all right, taking an occupation up here that has a really high propensity to use the task and giving them another occupation that's completely automated. So we all know that, like, you know, there are things that a certain profession does that bleed over into other people's profession. Like if you're a developer, you've probably got a little bit of design chops, or you've worked in that space. Or if you're an accountant, you probably do tax planning to an extent, but it's not your main game, right? So could you get an occupation up here and then automate with an agentic workflow and an agentic application, like to an extent, 80% of the way, something adjacent to what they do anyway, so that they don't have to then go and buy that service? I think that's also another kind of interesting strategy when you look at this data. Yeah. And to give it a bit of color of what it actually looks like, this is a bit of a cluster, but you can see these are the clusters of high-level clusters is what they call it in the data set. So this is the top one. Well, this is probably better. Configure, this is like the high-level kind of clustering that they've grouped using LLMs, like configure and troubleshoot, you know, they couldn't have made that sentence more boring, but you know what it is. And then there's a sub-cluster underneath that of configure and optimize Docker containers and orchestrate, you know, which is the bane of a lot of deployment engineers' existence. And then here is like two subclusters underneath those things. And then the individual tasks that are aligned to this ONET task classification system, where basically the Department of Labor Statistics goes out and tries to classify every single job with a set of tasks, which is just a high level abstraction, right? It's not a practical, but it gives you a sense of that. But this is where it gets interesting because that gives you that's 20% of records in the Claude data set of 1 million conversations. So of 1 million conversations, 200,000 of them had components of that task embedded within them. That's where it gets pretty interesting. And then underneath that, so yeah, you can actually dive into all of these and filter it, and, you know, filter it by occupation type, for example. But where it gets more interesting is you can see, all right, what's the percentage? And obviously this is not presented at a visual level, but you could see, all right, well, for this one, create and improve brand visuals. That's like a creative task. Then there's the cluster underneath that here. There's this, like the second cluster in the tasks, but it actually gives you for each of those, the aggregate percentage of those tasks that were collaborative learning in process, like learning in nature. So for those tasks, what percentage of Claude conversations were about the user wanting to be taught the concept? Then what percentage were, you know, collaborative in nature, but based on iteration? Like, was it a back and forth? Was it a turn-based thing? Iteratively, like go back, come and, you know, do this and then come back. Or like directive amount, like I was talking about before, very small number was based on this, you know, feedback ratio. They also have a thinking ratio. So you can stack rank tasks that Claude uses based on a thinking quotient. So you can see like what are the harder tasks people are asking for, which is quite cool. and get fine-grained around. That might be just as simple as just creating agentic applications just on really, really hard tasks for different user types, validation, and then you can see the total percentage rate. So I think it's a really good sort of marrying up those two things. But yeah, dive into it. I think it's worthwhile.
I'd mentioned like batch jobs and potential cost savings and things like that. Did you see anything in this data that would inform when you might consider running like batch jobs versus
No, is the short answer. I haven't, I don't think it's categorized like that. They anonymize the data, and I don't think they release a bunch of things around like when, how many, how often, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, sorry,
but I think you could get a sense of
put you on the spot there, but that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, no,
about.
that's an interesting question. I think probably the answer to that question would come in the percentage amount of the total percentage distribution of automation versus augmentation, right? You could get that, you could infer that from there.
Yeah, right.
Because they cite that in the blog post and also in the research, which is like, total percentage distribution between augmentation and here, directive or automation tasks. If you aggregate that up across a large organization, then there would be a lot of those tasks being triggered at any one time. That's that whole ambient agent thing, which is like, it's like just rather than optimizing, because this is all chat interface, right? Rather than optimizing for a person having to go to a chat and put something in that is just a directive automation task, you have that built into some sort of trigger where an agent executes and comes back to you. Yeah. So I reckon the answer to that question would be in the tasks that have that higher percentage of directive automation workflow on them.
Wait, and I know you said it. This is data only based on the usage of Claude Desktop, or does this include API?
Just Claude, Claude Desktop or Claude Web.
Which makes sense. I mean, on the API side, it'd be like through the roof on development.
Yeah, through the roof on coding. The other factor is, and they acknowledge this in the paper, they're like, look, this isn't a representative study in terms of like the task, but it is representative of how people are actually trying to get shit done with AI, which is why I think it's helpful if you're trying to build applications. Like you can say, like, this is what we think it's going to go, but this is what's actually happening today. Whereas like, if you want to build an agentic application today, I think this is a helpful kind of guidance data set. And they also acknowledge that because it's free and pro users, but it's not 100% representative of business users so much so, but they do try, and they talk about it in their methodology. They tried to reconcile those things and did some cross checks to see, like, does this person ask you about nutrition? Actually, are they a nutritionist? Not all the time, but they then say, well, or they infer that often when they did the investigation, the people in those professions were having similar conversations to the people who weren't anyway. But also for our purposes, if you're trying to build applications, it doesn't really matter because someone's trying to solve a problem. Like part of the agentic workflow or part of the promise of agentic systems is like, I don't need to go to a nutritionist. I've got an agentic nutritionist, right? Yeah. So it's also relevant. Yeah. But I think it's worth spending more time in here. Yeah. At least when I was diving into there. Some of the, as well as going through here, some of the areas, like I think I've spoken about a lot, a few of the ideas when I was like, well, how should I think about like building agentic systems, either in my current job or like, if there's market opportunities to be, to go and look at. I think that high adoption category is good because there is still a lot of space to build better agents with the people who are more predisposed to using AI tools, which is like the Google search strategy, which is like, all right, Google wasn't the first to search, but they were the last. Just going into a place where there's an nascent and emergent piece of technology with a lot of adoption and just really nailing one use case. For example, really nailing, and I know there are platforms out there doing this, but really nailing the data scientist use case in the way that Cursor is sort of dominating, right? And I know Hex is out there. There's a bunch of tools. Like that's an example because they are way up in the adoption curve. Is an example, and you could go across all sorts of categories to try and do that. I think that idea of just giving people an augmentation to their existing business that I was mentioning before is a really good idea because you could potentially get them to provide a adjacent service for cents on the dollar if they're only needing to go halfway up there. And that could unlock, rather than destroying categories, I reckon that could actually unlock more opportunity, because it would mean that more people, more businesses are willing to engage with the service and offer it to a different price point, which would open up new customer sets. Yeah.
Man,
and
I
then
learned, or I remember, like, I read the paper, checked out the data set, but not necessarily in the same way that you were talking through it. So now, of course, now I have homework. Thanks, Tom.
And the only other, I'll stop sharing my screen. The only other thing I was looking at in here was they do have a benchmark of like the barrier to entry for each of these occupations that they tag. So they basically try and, a 1 to 5 ranking. And they say like 0, like 1 is obviously like anyone can do it, no qualifications. 5 is like, a lot of qualifications. And 4 is where they see adoption really peak for Claude, but then it drops way off. Now, part of that is also because, like, really high level professionals are doctors and things like that, and there's like a physical element to it. So if you're going to execute an agentic kind of workflow on there, there's a physical component, which is sometimes hard. And it also is true at the lower end for like, very labor intensive jobs. It's just like the automation isn't as available because of the form factor. So it's not like there aren't opportunities in those places where there is low adoption. It's just the form factor would need to change for it to be injected in there. But it's definitely the prime position is in that level 4, which is like a bachelor's degree, and driving more agentic kind of applications in that domain, because that is the number one place where if you want to get access to that expertise, you still have to pay in a lot of areas. And we've seen how effective it is in, say, the coding environment for you to get some degree of outcome. And there are loads of other professions like that out there, which I think is the last kind of big area.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, not to oversimplify it, but I've said for a long time, a lot of white collar jobs are really like you take an input, you compare it or use another input, you aggregate inputs, you make a decision, and then you send an output. Like at the most simple level, that's pretty much a lot of jobs. So like, it's
that's so grim.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's dumbed down and super
Get back in your mouse
simplified,
wheel.
but yeah, it kind of goes to like if there's not a physical element required to your job, working remote, and we talk about ambient agents, right? So like it's sitting there and it reacts based on a trigger. Like the way I see it, I mean, that's a lot of jobs. Just that.
Yeah, you're right. It is a lot of jobs. But like I said, there's 2 ways to think about it. There's like the way that I was just outlining it then, which is like how people are using AI right now and how the economy is structured right now. And that's a very kind of narrow band, really, way to think about it. And then there's the completely orthogonal way to think about it, which is like there are new capabilities coming out every day and new ways to reimagine how work and the economy could be put together in this new world that we're going into, right? Which is, I think, a lot more hopeful and exciting than just like, all right, here are the components that are automated. Although on that basis, like there are a lot of things about a lot of jobs that people just like, we just don't like doing, but we have to do it because there's kind of no automated and easy way to make it happen. And I'm hoping all of these agentic systems just flood the zone in that space, which is what we're seeing, right? Like, although I am surprised that no one has destroyed PowerPoint slides yet. Like, I want someone to do that because I hate PowerPoint more than anything else.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Really, it's the Microsoft because it's not open source, and there's very few agents and different systems that can deal with those.
Yeah, every now and then,
actually,
Twitter, on X, I see like a thread going, no one's created it, and then all these people will push out like these apps. I'm like, none of those apps are replacing PowerPoint.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right, that's all I got, man.
I love it, man. That is seriously, now I have to go back and I'll be finding myself knee deep in data analysis once again. I haven't done a ton of that lately.
Yeah,
that's always
if you're interested, I'll put up a link to the Google Colab notebook as well, and you can play with that. Because the Anthropic guys published the notebook, and then you can replicate their analysis in the report as well, but then they just have one you can play with too, which is a lot of fun. But I think someone like you probably needs to use that rather than me.
Man, well, I learned a lot. I appreciate it. And I'll talk to you next week. Always a blast.